Well, welcome everybody. This is John Sarver from GLREA, and thank you for coming. And I'd like to thank our sponsors too, the State Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, Eagle, and our other sponsors, Homeland Solar, Harvest Solar, Tree Energy, and Sumter Solar. And we have to always make a pitch for if one of you, just by probably by accident, haven't joined GLREA yet, we would love to have you join us to support our advocacy and education activities, which you can do online at the website glrea.org. And John Richter, who's our senior policy analyst for GLREA, and has lots of fun with our intervention at the MPSC in reading thousands of pages of applications and testimony, is here tonight to kind of give us an update related to our intervention with a specific focus on data centers. And so with that, let me turn it over to John. Go ahead, John.
Thank you. So, John Richter, I'm the chair of the policy committee. I'm on the board, and I am an expert witness in cases before the MPSC. I put my email in the chat. If you would like a copy of the slides, send me an email. If there's a question that didn't get answered here, you think of something later, send me an email. I see. Okay. There we go. So, for the past 2 decades, electricity demand in the United States has been approximately flat, actually declining in the state of Michigan. And so the industry's focus has been on the energy transition, moving from burning coal, which back when I started talking about energy in the early 90s, I mean, it was providing 60% of our electricity. The transition from that to a lot of gas-fired plants and a combination of wind and solar. But this has changed now. We've had this dramatic expansion in data centers, primarily for artificial intelligence, and it's driving up demand. And all of the focus, the articles, the studies, the conferences, everything, it's all about how do we add more capacity? And the tech companies that are hungry for this capacity have boatloads of money to spend. So they get lots of attention. Now, this is a graph of electricity generated and used in the United States going back to 1950. And you can see we had dramatic growth for decades and decades. And then somewhere around 2006, which was a period when both natural gas and oil prices were very high, our electricity demand flattened out. And it was more or less horizontal for almost 20 years. And now it's kicking up again. And it's a result of the data centers getting built, and to much lesser degree. Well, some of this so far has been electric vehicles, but data centers are going to completely dominate the demand. This is a graph of where we got our electricity for the last 10 years by source, and you can see the green bar there is renewables, has had healthy growth. But the thing, and coal, the black line is going down, which is a good thing. But the thing I want to point out is the orange bar there, natural gas, actually grew more than wind and solar together. So the transition that's been happening has really been a transition to gas and wind and solar, as much as we would like to think that it was a fully renewable kind of change that was happening. This is where we get our electricity today. Gas is the dominant source. Coal and nuclear are close behind. Wind and solar together are 12.5%. That's 1/8. That's a whole lot more than it was 20 years ago. But we have a lot of room to grow. So the rest of this is going to be about data centers. You got to start with the definition. What is a data center? Well, they're really boring. It's just a big building with a high-speed internet connection loaded with computers. And I mean rows and rows and rows of racks of shelves of computers. That's all it is. Now, this term was invented back in the 1990s. And at that time, it was the idea that companies, instead of owning their own computing center and managing it, would outsource that. and some other company, a data center company, would build and operate all that, and the other companies that just needed computer resources would just lease capacity on that over the internet. They call it, computing in the cloud. Now, at that time, I was working for Global Crossing, and we spun off a company called Global Center. That was the whole business model. It didn't work out well. Lots of people had that idea. There was a lot of overbuild. Sales were not up to projections, and we spun off and sold the company less than a year later at enormous losses and filed for bankruptcy a year and a half later. So did not end well. I hope this doesn't end up like that, but it's certainly a possibility. The term data center is now kind of evolved. It mostly means it's a bunch of processors optimized for artificial intelligence, or maybe shortly before this, it was about, Bitcoin mining, right? Which were similar processors, by the way. The tech companies are betting the farm on this. They are convinced that businesses across the world are going to spend heavily to use artificial intelligence to enhance productivity and reduce their payrolls. They have huge ideas about trimming staff. There's some of this going on already. We see it with computer programmers using AI to multiply their productivity and reduce the number of programmers they need. And they are investing trillions, and I mean that literally, of dollars into this. This is what it looks like. This is a data center in Ohio. It's just a big flat building, and why it doesn't have solar panels all across the roof is a mystery to me. In the foreground here, what you see are the cooling systems, right? These are all the systems that are dumping waste heat into the air as it's pumped out of the building there. And up at the top here, it might be a little hard to see. It's a giant row of backup generators. And on the top of each one of those, there's a little muffler, right? And then up here, we see the substation that's feeding all of the power into this data center system. And that's what they look like. By the way, this is one of 5 buildings at this location, right? You can see there's a second one up in the corner here, right? They've got 5 of these. It's just mind blowing. Now, this is what it looks like on the inside. So it's all on raised floors, and that's so that the air conditioning can blow through underneath. They usually have the cold come in the bottom and blow up, and the heat goes out the top. And then you just have these racks and racks and racks and racks of servers. You see their little power plugs here, and these other cables are their internet connections, wiring all this together. And that's all it is. Rows and rows and rows of this, warehouses, acres of rows of racks of computing equipment. So what do these massive systems need from the outside? Well, first and foremost, data centers need lots and lots of electric power to power all those processors. Now, all of that electricity gets converted to heat, with the infinitesimal exception of sound that might be generated and get out of the building. Each of the processors for these kind of data centers is drawing 1,200 watts, which is a whole lot more than is happening in my little laptop here, right? That's a blow dryer of heat coming out of each one of the processors. Therefore, they need a lot of cooling, and especially in the summer. There is actually a slight preference for locating data centers in cold climates because it reduces the total air conditioning they have to use across the year. Most of the cooling systems use water evaporation in those cooling towers to get rid of the heat, right? And so they end up using a lot of water. And usually they're connected to the municipal water supply. They're using fully purified chlorinated water to just boil it off into the atmosphere, which seems kind of wasteful to me. Some of them used what's called a closed loop system, and those use considerably less water. And Microsoft is trialing a new design that uses no water at all. But the ones that don't use water, it's less efficient, and they actually use more electricity for the cooling than the ones that are using up the water. And then finally, these data centers generally all have backup power. Even though they're often connected to directly the subtransmission or even the transmission system, which very rarely has outages, They got rows of backup generators there to keep the power on in the event that there's an outage. And sometimes that's a key issue, right? Either those are natural gas, and now you've got a big natural gas pipeline coming in there that's rarely used, or they're diesel, which of course is quite dirty when all of those generators fire up. And in either case, it's noisy when all of those generators fire up. This phenomenon is not limited to the United States. This map is really grainy, and I apologize, but it's the best thing I could get. You see all these, little dots here in the United States, in Europe, in China. So U.S. and China are the leaders in this, but there's a ton of it going on elsewhere. And this slide, I'm going to spend a little time on. So I got this from Wood Mackenzie. They're a consulting company. They did a webinar that I attended. And they're saying that in the US, the committed and under construction, right? So contracts have been signed, money's on the line, or it's actually being built. The load is 160 gigawatts, which is 22% of the entire US capacity. That's already committed. Lots more is in the pipeline. Now, there's a little note down here that says, well, actually, that figure was based on 35 utilities, and there are other ones, so it's probably actually a little higher than that. And then when you come down here, they say, well, if you add a few more things that have high confidence they're going to happen, well, that's 24%. And then there's this giant queue of stuff that, no contracts have been signed yet, but studies are being done, talks are being had, they're being pursued. And, that's just, well, that's 454 gigawatts, right, compared to the 160 that's already guaranteed or under construction. So the scale of this is mind-blowing. It's unlike anything that's happened to the electric grid. This is bigger than air conditioning, and that's saying something. So, how does the grid support them? Well, so as a specific example, there's a data center proposed. There's contracts proposed in a case by DTE Energy. It's near Saline. It's going to service Oracle Corporation, which I know well. They've created an LLC that'll actually own it, but Oracle is the parent company that'll own the LLC. It's going to take 1,400 megawatts. And that one data center by itself will increase DTE's annual sales of electricity by 27%. These data centers operate 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, right? They never shut down. They may shut down a few servers at a time and swap out different ones or, upgrade them or whatever, but the data center is operating all the time, including all of our peak demand times. That means that they're contributing to peak demand. And in fact, they use somewhat more electricity during the summer because they are air conditioning, right, in the summer, and they can't use the natural cold outside, which means that their load profile is a little bit like everybody else. It peaks in the summer, which is terrible from the grid perspective, right? If these things just ran 9 months a year and turned off for the summer, it wouldn't strain the grid much at all. So the utility is going to build new power plants to meet all this demand. Because they have to meet the demand in the peak period when they don't have a whole lot of excess capacity right now. And then they're going to add high voltage lines to bring the power into these data centers. It is very difficult to meet 24-hour, 365-day a year demand using wind and solar, even if you add batteries. Utilities are planning more gas plants. This is also from that Wood Mackenzie study that I saw. This shows different regions of the U.S. electric grid, and unfortunately, it uses their bizarre nomenclature. But it has two columns here, right? Oops, sorry about that. The dark one is the demand growth that they're expecting in gigawatts between 2025 and 2030. They're only looking out 5 years. And then the bright red one is the additional thermal generation in peak hours, right? That's going to get built. New power plants that are going to come online for this. Now, you notice they say thermal generation. So they're not talking about solar and wind. They got no problem with it. They're looking at the new thermal generation. Well, what's thermal generation? Well, it could be coal, but no one's building new coal plants. It could be gas, and it will. It could be nuclear, but no one can get a nuclear plant built in the next 5 years, which means these aren't just thermal, they're all gas. You really could be more specific. So the number one region is PJM. So that's Virginia and Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and they've got a ton of them over there. Um, and they're going to build, a lot of new capacity for that. Texas is second. That's ERCOT, right? And they're going to build some. They apparently have some excess capacity. MISO is the region we're in. And they're projecting 10 gigawatts of new demand within the MISO region in the 5 years. And 9.3 of that is going to be new thermal plants. So this is not going to be met with wind and solar. That's not what the consultants and the studies are showing. This map shows proposed data centers across a chunk of the country, including Michigan. I counted like 22 dots in the state of Michigan there. I found, some specific ones, Stargate and Saline, that's 1,400 megawatts. Hyperscale near Kalamazoo it exists today, but they're going to vastly expand it. Steelcase Pyramid, you can read the list. So, and 10 other proposals at least. So nobody quite knows what all these things are, which ones are going to happen, which ones aren't. Some of these they're proposing, they're going to multiple different states and saying, we want to build it. How would you guys like to have it, and comparing the deals, right? So all of the deals being proposed everywhere aren't going to happen, but some of them are. So how does the Michigan Public Service Commission weigh in on this? Well, one of their big concerns is if the data center discontinues operations and the utility has built up all this massive capacity to feed it, well, then the rest of us are going to end up paying for all those plants that are then sitting there idle, right? That'd be a stranded asset. They're very concerned on that. That's kind of their main focus in this. And I have a few other concerns. So core concern to the case that we're hoping to get in, and I'll talk about that, is if the plant operates as expected, do the rest of us end up subsidizing the operation of this data center because some of the utility costs are being borne by us rather than the data center? Key question. The other question is, will this spike in demand mean that the utilities won't meet the renewable energy standard? 50% in 2030, 60% in 2035, 100% clean energy in 2040. Can they still do that while they're building all this new capacity for the data centers? Now, it's actually worse than that. And this is one of the fallacies of DTE's planning is they said, well, we can make the 50% by 2030. But I don't think it's going to be 50% because the state law, our legislators passed a significant tax reward to these data centers if they locate in Michigan. But to get the tax credit, they have to source at least 90% of their electricity from renewable energy within 6 years of startup. Now, in reality, they're going to want to get the tax credit right away, so they're not going to want to wait 6 years. They're going to want to do that as fast as they can. And the fast and easy way to do that is to just sign up for the utilities voluntary green power program. So I expect most of them are going to take that route and do that, which means it'll be 90 or 100% of their load will be met by renewables or tried to somehow. So I think it's worse than the 50% that DTE, for instance, was figuring on. Okay, so there has already been action on this. Consumers Energy went to the Public Service Commission. They said, we're talking to companies about locating data centers here. We want to set up a tariff specifically for them. And what they did was they took an existing tariff and they said, here's our standard commercial rate, and we're going to add protections if the data center goes out of business. And they did. And they said, look, you have to pay 80% of your projected electricity usage every month, even if you don't use nearly that much. And if you got a business and you're not using anything, you've got to pay 15 years of that 80% monthly payments, which is a pretty, big burden to put on the data center companies. But they seem to have a lot of cash and will probably accept that. It is presumed that the fact that they use the existing rate sheet means that the data centers will cover all of their costs and the rest of us will not be subsidizing them. And, the Attorney General says he doesn't think that's true. And so that's an interesting point of contention. Consumers says that they will still comply with the clean energy law, but the details of that will come out in their future renewable energy plan case. They're not going to talk about that here and now. Now, the commission accepted this, right? This has all been signed, sealed, and delivered by the commission. Yes, consumers, you can go out and sign up data centers under this proposal. But what boggles the mind, consumers says that they have data center inquiries amounting to more than 15 gigawatts. And their entire generating capacity is 5.3 gigawatts. Tell me how that's going to work. Moving on to DTE. DTE has filed a case, but they've taken a very different approach. They have not created a generalized set of rules for data centers. What they've instead is come with contracts, two contracts with one data center, right? Oracle is the parent company. They're going to set this up in Saline. And they want the commission to approve those contracts. They have requested that that get approved on an ex parte basis, which means there's no interveners, there's no case. The commission staff looks it over and goes, yeah, that's pretty good. The commission votes, says, yep, we approve it. And that's that. None of the rest of us even get to talk to them about it. We have petitioned, as has the Attorney General and several other environmental groups, to be interveners and to make it a full-blown contested case, although on an expedited basis, to argue about and bring out some of these issues. So specifics of the contract, it's a 19-year power contract, but at the customer's discretion, they can extend it for another 10 or 20 years. So it could be a 39-year contract. And the DTE says, well, the contract says if it's not approved by December 5th, then they can back out. December 5th was not an arbitrary date. That was the date of the MPSC's last meeting. They did not act on this in that meeting. Therefore, as of now, Oracle has the right to walk away from the contract, but they have 30 days to invoke that right, and the MPSC is going to meet again December 18th. So I would suspect they're going to sit tight till then and hope for a decision at that time. Really interesting feature of this. Oracle has agreed to pay for 1,400 megawatts of batteries, which DTE will own and operate. That's a huge expense of upfront capital that they're going to dish out for a utility asset, which I find to be a very strange arrangement. But the idea is that way, it won't actually increase DTE's peak demand if they can run the whole thing off the battery and then charge it during off-peak hours, sort of acting like the Ludington Pump Storage Facility. So that's a very strong feature of this. But I'll get to that. And DTE says, well, we did a study, and not only are they going to pay their full weight, but this is actually going to save the other ratepayers several $100 million a year. But they didn't give us the study. They just gave us the results. They say that they will still be able to meet the clean energy standard, and they say that they have banked so many renewable energy credits in the past that they through 2032, by burning up that bank of RECs, they'll only have to add 443 megawatts of solar in order to meet the renewable energy standard. But like I said, I don't think the 50%'s the issue. They're going to go sign up for the VGP program, and they're going to have to do 90 or 100%. DTE says they're in discussions, including this plant, with 8.4 gigawatts of data centers that want to locate here, and their total capacity, generation capacity right now is 11 gigawatts. So the numbers here just boggle my mind. Clifton, I see your question. What was the battery rating? They did not tell us. They talk about it in power, right? How many megawatts it can provide, but they don't tell us how many megawatt hours of storage it is. That's one of my burning questions. And if they grant a contested case, I'll be issuing discovery questions, and that will be right near the top of the list. So again, we petitioned that this should be a contested case, and we would like to intervene in that. And we pointed out some problems with DTE's application. First of all, it's impossible to determine what the real impact will be on other ratepayers without the ability to do discovery questions and actually see the analysis that DTE did rather than just see the conclusion of the analysis. But it's awfully suspicious that they provided the conclusion of the analysis but didn't include it in their application. They could have just stuck that right in there, and they didn't do it. So in response to this, they have now since filed a reply, and they said, well, here's the analysis, but they gave it to us as a PDF of what had been a spreadsheet. So you can't see the formulas. You don't know what the ingoing assumptions were. Doesn't quite get you there. The battery agreement only lasts 15 years. The batteries have a scheduled lifetime of 15 years. But the contract is for 19 or could be extended for 39 years. So I don't see that the battery contract actually solves the capacity problem for the life of the contract. And this was a really gaping hole. So in their computations for affordability, they said, well, we're assuming we can do this with 1,800 megawatts of solar. But their own calculations showed that to feed a 1,400 megawatt station, they would need 3,200 megawatts of solar. So where'd the 1,800 come from? Well, that was the halfway point between the 3,200, which is the real number, and the 4,400 that they said they could get by with for the first few years because they have banked RECs. It's a non sequitur. It makes no sense. They basically pulled a number out of the air. Oracle has provided some collateral for those minimum payments that'll have to be made if the data center doesn't come online. But the Wall Street Journal just wrote an article that said, these tech companies, specifically Oracle, are borrowing up the wazoo and have a lot of off the tables, liabilities that make their creditworthiness really questionable.
So it's not DTE's creditworthiness, it's Oracle's creditworthiness.
Yes. So the question is, would these payments really happen? If it turns out that the whole AI boom is a bubble like, the internet was in the 1990s, Oracle could go bankrupt. They're betting the farm on this. In their last renewable energy plan case, DTE cited all kinds of problems that they're having with getting solar facilities built fast enough to meet the RPS. And now they say, oh, we can add another 1,400 megawatts and still make it. Well, it's not what they said in their last plan. So, they've changed their story to match what they want. So finally, my personal assessment. These opinions are solely mine, and I am solely responsible for their content. It is virtually certain that data centers are going to make the utilities lots more profit. That's pretty clear. Both utilities have provided some substantial protection in case the data center defaults and to prevent stranded costs, but it's by no means complete protection. So the generation facilities are generally a 35-year life, and a 10 or 15-year, of 80% payments is not going to cover that unless somebody else comes along with a big load and takes up that capacity. So there's still some exposure. In their order in the consumer's case, the MPSC said they thought they had reasonably balanced the concerns of both parties, the other ratepayers who might get stuck holding the bag, and the company, the data center company that doesn't want to get hung with these massive promised payments. Their proposals may or may not create a burden to other ratepayers. I just can't tell. That they haven't given us the data and the figures to actually be able to see that. DTE's proposal looks stronger than consumers, which surprises me because DTE, I don't know, seems to be a little more scurrilous in my experience. But I mean, buying all the batteries up front, consumers isn't getting that. So that's a really big thing. But if there are costs that are getting shifted to the rest of the ratepayers, what I can tell you is it's going to be next to impossible to prove that after the fact. All this stuff just gets buried in mountains of accounting that are big, broad categories, and you won't be able to tell what was what and who's to blame. The other concern that one of the other interveners brought up that I thought was really interesting, so they can't possibly build the new capacity fast enough day one. For instance, for the Saline plant, they're going to start operating in 2027 and then be ramping up in 2028. They're going to be at 10 gigawatts. DT can't possibly build that capacity. So they're going to be buying energy on the wholesale market in the meantime. Well, guess what? All the states next to us have data centers going in too, and their utilities are probably all thinking the same thing. So they can't all buy the power from their neighbors, and it's going to bid up the wholesale price of power, and that's going to cost all of us. The other thing is that it is nearly certain that the data centers are going to result in more gas-fired plant builds. DTE has been public about this. They've said that they're going to build at least one more gas plant to do this. And both utilities are already straining to meet the renewable energy standard. Consumers has got two different solar farms that have been tied up in litigation that are part of their plan that they need to meet the requirements. So I think that one or both utilities are likely to apply for waivers to the clean energy standard. There's within the law, there's an option for that. It gives them lots of different excuses they can use, and I think data centers are going to be the big excuse. So with that, just let me say, if you want the slides, if you have other questions that don't get handled here, there's my email address, johna.richter@pm.me. And with that, I will throw it open to questions. Yes, Charles Morris.
Yeah, hi, John. I got it's about limits and constraints in this whole adventure. I mean, first of all, in terms of what's considered externality, which really is like climate effects of this if you don't meet all this renewable energy. Secondly, I asked earlier, I saw something. I don't know if there's gas is going to be peaking at any time soon, or in terms of cost benefit. Like I was looking up while what you're making presentation said there's one estimate of 2030 of might get to peak gas even with fracking, and then the this sense of is supply demand. I mean, it's like the Wild West or like the gold rush or the .com stuff. There's concerns, and even tonight in the news, the nightly news, the White House, Trump administration say don't put any restrictions at all, and he's trying to go after states if they put some constraints. Are we, given the constraints and the fact that Americans don't like the notion of limits, are we cruising for a bruising somewhere down the line?
So I think there's a significant sort of, I'll say, right-wing camp on this, which is, well, we're going to build a whole bunch of small modular nuclear reactors and they'll take this all over. So that might, and there's some of these data center companies have signed contracts with companies to supply them power from nuclear fusion, of
Wow.
which there are no such plants in the world yet, um, on the belief that, you know, our ability to crank out new technology is unlimited. There's also some developments happening with geothermal energy, not like geothermal heating, but like generating electricity by utilizing fracking drilling technology to drill down into the hot core and generate electricity that way. Uh, if those things are going to work out or not, who knows, right? But if we're relying on natural gas to do this for very long, I think you're right. I think we're going to be in a world of hurt.
Okay, thank you.
So I want to respond to Jay's comment about 1200 watts. I thought that was a pretty high number too. I did get that out of an article. I don't know. But ultimately, it doesn't matter how many watts per processor it is. What matters is to the grid is how much the whole system is. And, you know, those are the numbers that we know. Yeah, and you're probably right. Servers is probably not quite the right term, Clifton. I'll agree with you on that. Um, but yeah, they're video cards, they're GPUs. You know, they're mostly NVIDIA's, the same thing you have your graphics processors in your computers these days. But yeah, you know, however many watts it is per processor, who cares? The data center is going to be 1400 megawatts. Yeah, and Wayne, it was exactly my point, right? If the data centers don't get up and operational, Oracle's probably not going to be in business. So, or any of these companies. Um, and yeah, then how do you reuse the 50-acre building? That's hilarious. I like that. Thanks, Wayne. Like the battery option. Yeah, well, what's odd, Jay, is that for the Saline, the DTE is going to own and operate all these batteries. They're not dedicated to the facility at all, and they're still going to build, from what I've read, diesel backup generators for the whole place. And yeah, they didn't tell us the megawatt hour rating, which is very annoying. Who will pay for the replacement batteries? Yeah. So, Janet, that was an interesting question in my mind because the way the contract read is it said the contract's for 15 years, and after that, it can be renewed if both parties agree. And I'm like, why the heck would Oracle agree to buy a new set of batteries if they don't have to? The power contract doesn't stipulate that, and the power contract will keep going on. So that part didn't make much sense to me. Um, there have been some studies maintain that replacement of the computer racks. Well, that's another interesting thing here is how long will it be before all these processors will be considered obsolete and there'll be new ones that'll do 10 times more with a tenth the power or whatever, right? Or what if somebody comes out with a new generation of AI software that only needs a tenth as many processors to do the same thing? Uh, these
Well,
technologies are advancing very quickly, and crazy stuff like that could happen.
isn't that what DeepSeek has done out of China? It allegedly uses a lot less power and because it's a lot less chips and all that. So one of the questions I have is which of these data centers or which of these companies that are providing all this artificial intelligence, which one is going to succeed on the competitive marketplace?
It seems likely that two or three of them will succeed and the others will all go bust. That's the way these kind of manic industries usually happen. Lee, you're being patient. What can I tell you?
Well, I was going to mention that a data center is not all data centers are the same. There was an article in the Toledo Blade that said there's 23 data centers around Columbus, Ohio. And when you go on Google and say how much power does a data center use, it says they usually use 50 to 100 megawatts.
Yeah.
Well, you can see that there's a broad range. And so just to count the number of data centers doesn't really relate to the amount of power they use.
No, which is why I looked at, how many total gigawatts the utilities say that they're talking to, right?
Yep.
Where was my list there? There we go. So, we've got a data center operating south of Kalamazoo that's 30 megawatts, but they're now expanding it to 340. So it's completely arbitrary, right? It's just how big is the building and how many rows of racks do you have, right? It scales infinitely. So we don't know.
But it really
Yes,
shows when you look at the agreement in Saline, it really shows how we need to educate because that agreement actually forbids them to put solar on their roof, which comes from so much misinformation. They absolutely should cover their roof with something that helps the problem, even though it's minuscule.
I had heard that, Lee, and I had forgotten it. So thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, I mean, these gigantic flat roofs right next to 24/7 demand is an ideal situation to install solar, and no one would even friggin' see it unless they were flying a drone over it to take a picture. So I don't
And
understand the
then on the
objection.
other side, we have a township that has a list of things that they think the data center ought to do. And that list of things they want to put in the ordinance says they have to cover the roofs with solar and they have to use 51% of their power developed locally. Well, another impossibility, but
Yeah, it is, right? So if you're looking at 5 acres a megawatt, right, then the Selene data center would need, do some quick math there, what, 7,000 acres? You can't make that a requirement. So, yeah. John Freeman.
Dave Curtis and Kim Peters were ahead of me. Let them go first, then
Oh,
call
okay. I'm
me.
sorry. I don't see them, so I guess I need to expand my chart here or let somebody else call on people.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Thank you, John. It's pretty informative. I'm glad you're doing this work. My question is, who, how, and will they hold the utilities' feet to the fire? In other words, enforce these contracts and make them live up to all these numbers?
So the contracts were signed are proposed to be signed between DTE and Oracle, right? And they don't really commit DTE to much other than supplying the power, and buying batteries. Um, the contracts are really about what the company is going to offer, to get that.
But as far as uh, MPSC goes, they're involved with these contracts. Will
Yes.
they be able to say, "Hey, wait a minute, all these numbers you said, uh, you know, you're you're going to live up to this, that, and the other thing, and you haven't. Who's going to enforce that part?"
Um, I would say no one, the way things are
Ah,
done right now. Now, that might be something we could negotiate in if we get a chance to say that, which is to say, there's a couple ways you could do this. You could say we're going to create a new customer class for data centers, and all of the expenses for those will go in that category, and that'll ensure that no other ratepayers end up paying for it. Or we could say you've got to keep separate accounting on all these upgrades, and we're going to total them and compare it to the actual revenues. Or you could say the data centers have to accept a contract that says when the grid is under stress, we turn off the power to them. Other states have done this, right? They have the backup generators. So it's not like you're blacking them out. They're going to go on operating. And that would dramatically reduce the expenses that this incurs on the rest of the grid because we wouldn't have to build one-for-one capacity to match their demand, right? It's no problem running these things at night when we got all kinds of spare capacity or in the winter. The problem is the summer days when the air conditioning is at max, providing the power then. Shut them off for maybe 100 hours a year, and the costs that these impose on the grid would be dramatically less. I don't know if they even brought up that idea because that's not in DTE's interest. They want to invest all this money in new power plants. That's how they make profits.
I just want to add one other comment to Dave's question. Um, Anytime there's a new industrial development, the Public Service Commission, they're charged with figuring out a way to provide power for new industrial developments. So from that perspective, a data center is no different than if General Motors wanted to build a brand new factory and they wanted to get some special economic development rate so to me, if going back to Dave's question, the entity in the state that can oversee these data centers are frankly people like Jen Hill, who served in the House, that could provide oversight capacity, or the Attorney General in Michigan. And Dana Nessel right now is leading the charge about wanting to see the details of this data center in Saline because she is just like Richter, she is skeptical about how this is not going to impact on residential ratepayers because, as John said, they haven't provided any details on how they come up with that computation. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is that we have a major election in 2026 where we're going to lose Dana Nessel, as well as the governor, as well as everybody in the House and Senate will be up for reelection. So we need to think real carefully about whom we want as our next attorney general, because that person may be the one that will be empowered to kind of act as kind of an oversight capacity for some and to be able to represent residential ratepayers with a lot of authority given to them by their elected position. And so this kind of leads into the question of where are these candidates for attorney general, where are they receiving their campaign funds? Because as we all know that DTE and consumers give a lot of money to the legislatures, and Jen has talked about that quite a bit. But they also give a lot of money to the governor as well as the attorney general. So if I in a horrible hypothetical, we get someone elected to attorney general who took a lot of DTE or consumers money, and all of a sudden they start backing off from being the true consumer protector, and because they're kind of been bought off, so to speak. So we got to be very careful over this next year because we may be in a situation of a perfect storm, so to speak.
Hey, John, can I follow up on that?
Of course.
This is Jen. Hi, everybody. From what I understand at this time, 2 of the 3 attorney general candidates have taken a pledge not to take corporate money. That is Totten and Savitt. And I'm not sure about McDonald. She when she was up here in Marquette about in October, she didn't say yes or no, but I did get an email from her today about no corporate money in her fundraising appeal. So I think John's right. They are the backstop. They're also the backstop against all the Trump shenanigans. They're going to keep coming at us for the next 2 years. Even if we do take the legislature, we have to have an attorney general who's going to just continue to sue Trump continuously. So those are really important. And the attorney general in Michigan is not chosen by a vote of the people. It's chosen by a vote of the party. So if you really want to have influence on the attorney general race, join the Democratic Party and come to the state party convention on April 19th in Detroit.
And Jen, I'd like to answer your question that you put in the chat here, right? So DTE is going to operate those batteries to do basically price arbitrage, right? They're going to charge them at night and discharge them in the day. And part of the contract is the difference in those amounts of money goes back to Oracle. So, they're buying the batteries, but
Oh,
DT's owning and operating them, but the Oracle's getting the financial benefit out of that.
oh,
So their
that can I?
usage is committed. It's not, oh, you can go do whatever you want with it.
So that when I was serving, I had a couple long conversations with MEIBC about the laws around batteries because whoever operates the batteries, yeah, they stand to make a hell of a lot of money. And the utilities
That goes back to Oracle for having bought them.
and not to owe, the ratepayers who are subsidizing. I mean,
Yeah, if you'd like specific citations on that, drop me an email. I can
okay,
show you right in the contract where it is.
Yeah,
yikes.
Kim Peters
In the
has been
public
waiting.
record.
Kim Peters has been waiting for a while. So, Kim, why
Yeah.
don't you go
Oh,
ahead with your
sorry.
question?
Yeah.
Hi, this has been a lot of information. I'm not a technical person, so the questions, I've got a couple of questions. First, regarding the small data center they're proposing for Lansing, that's a closed loop system with BWL taking the excess heat for to heat the downtown buildings. I was wondering what, if anything, you know about that.
So I'm familiar with that, and it's a fabulous idea, right? I mean, in my mind, we ought to be breaking these data centers into small units, putting them into existing office buildings, and heating the whole office building with the waste heat all winter, right? Rather than just dumping it out into the air all winter. It just seems like an atrocious waste. But yes, go on.
Okay. Have they looked at any other kind of coolant besides water?
Well, so there's a working fluid, right, which is probably not water. The big water consumption is literally they're spraying water over the hot coils, and the water evaporates off and cools the coils better than just air would cool them, right?
Oh,
That's the
gotcha.
big water consumer. So it's not a matter of just choosing a different working fluid.
Okay. Thanks for explaining that. And then last thing, I haven't been near one, so I can't speak from personal experience, but I've heard that the noise, the humming, droning sounds coming from them is quite excessive. And
Yeah, I've
having
heard that.
been
Now
down from 3 or 4 people blowing, with leaf blowers for several hours on end, that to me would be a problem. Is there any talk of any kind of noise remediation?
I haven't seen that. In the case of the Saline Center, they're buying 110 acres, which should give them some buffer distance. But I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Doug Cornell.
Excuse me. Yeah, John, I got a question. Well, it's kind of a question for, following up on the political side. The governor appoints the MPSC, so isn't it going to make a big difference who the governor is? And I see a concern of Duggan and Jocelyn Benson splitting the vote, and John James walks in and becomes a governor and appoints a whole new PSC. So I guess I understand the Attorney General is a good. We need to protect that, but it sounds like we need to protect the governor as well.
It absolutely matters who the governor is in terms of the MPSC. Commissioners are appointed for, I believe it's 3-year terms, and they're staggered so that one governor generally doesn't get to appoint all 3 of them. In our case, Whitmer did get to appoint all 3 because there were some that left early and made that possible. But then when one of their terms came up, she didn't appoint them back again. She appointed someone that DTE picked out after DTE made a generous campaign contribution. So maybe a different governor doesn't actually help. I'm going to leave that an open question. Jen Hill, back to you.
Thank you. Wanted to say on that question of waste heat, I'm up here in Marquette. We have a sister city relationship with a city in Finland. And that city is in fact doing the waste heat with the data centers. And we're very happy with it. And which gives me some pause about what's going to happen here in the Upper Peninsula, but it does. It is successful in Finland, and I also had a question, a little bit off topic, which I texted to you, John. But are folks aware that the Speaker Hall yesterday made $645 million in cuts to existing programs in a Doge-like cutting of current programs, including $7 million in clean energy? But I haven't seen an actual list of which projects are hit. So just wanted to, because I'm actually jumping on a call at 8 about that, because that $645 million is hitting almost everything in Michigan. And they found an obscure rule in the House Appropriations that they can do this with existing rollover money. It's money that's rolling over so this is stuff that Kim's right. And it's stuff I voted on when I was in office, and they're going to use these as bargaining chips with the governor. So I just wanted to raise that awareness, and if that whatever that $7 million is, you might want to find out. Thank you. And I'm going to have to jump on this other 8 o'clock call in a few minutes.
Okay. Lee, you're muted.
It's really wonderful we have a contact in Finland, because Finland is subsidizing rooftop solar. And when you think about how long the days are in the winter, hello, it seems like the worst possible situation. But the district heating plus generation works through the winter, and then they can shut down the heating system and make power in the summer with the solar. And I'd love to have a presentation on GLREA of someone who can speak clearly about the Finland's renewable power situation. Thank you.
Go find that person. I'm sure we'd love to hear from them. Who else has their
Clifton
hand up that
Brown.
I
Go
can't
ahead,
see?
Clifton.
Yeah, thanks. I'm a consumers sucker. And after complaining and browbeating them for quite a while, they put me on a survey evaluation type team where they occasionally send out whatever and say, give us some feedback on does it make sense, blah, blah, blah. And we just got one 2 days ago about new rate structures on how they were going to do the graphics to explain them, which were horrible and actually misleading. But the bottom line is they're beginning to really move towards the 14-day super peak rate if you buy into it. And they give you a teaser low rate for the summer, but during these 14 days, whenever they decide, you have to shut down during the peak time, or they charge you $1 a kilowatt hour.
Mm-hmm.
It's an opt-in, and they give you peanuts to opt into it. But the bottom line takeaway is they know they're in energy consumption production problems, and they're trying to figure some way to bamboozle the customers into helping them. And it smells like, from one of the slides, they're moving towards vehicle to grid.
Okay.
It wasn't anywhere stated in those words, but they're starting to talk about pushing back to the grid, and does not appear to be solar, just typical PV installation. So just they're beginning to think ahead, maybe.
Well, let me respond to both of those. So first of all,
Great, you probably know more than I do.
I'm familiar with the rate structure you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I actually very much support the general idea of that. Now, whether the particulars are actually working out for the customer is quite another matter. But there's a pretty well established in Michigan cases that a peak kilowatt hour is worth about $1. We have programs where they'll pay you $1 a kilowatt hour to take your load off during signaled peak times. But then they never actually signal them. But they're preparing for a time when they have shortages. And I think that's very interesting. And that's the sort of thing they ought to put these data centers on, right? In terms of the vehicle to grid, I've looked at that a lot because I just got an EV, and I think we're a ways away from vehicle to grid. I think we're much closer, and there in many cases for vehicle to load. So the utilities are experimenting with this stuff. DTE is as well. I don't think they really want it to happen in any big way, but they want to pretend that they do. But the potential to just run your house off of your electric car and not actually stick power back out onto the grid, it's just technically much easier to do. And I think there's some real potential for that. And I hope they pursue it strongly.
Yeah, question for you. You might know, one of the slides, they were talking about not the case of where you simply didn't use the load during the super peak, but load shifting from the 14-day super load, super high load, or super high cost, and shifting the load to a lower cost and giving you a credit, which means they have to know, A, you did it, and know how much the load was
That sounds like
historically.
a battery system, right? Where you're going to run off your battery for a while, and they want to be able to monitor that and say, okay, we're going to give you credit for it, is my guess.
Okay, so you're guessing then I'm going to, oh no, they're saying change it from the high peak to the low rate. So we're shifting
Mm-hmm.
not to battery, but earlier in
Well,
the morning.
yeah.
I'm going to shift it from 2 to 7 to
Which, I mean, you
before
can do
2 or
that
after
by,
7.
running your dishes and your laundry at different hours, right? Um,
But
to a
they're going to
degree.
measure it and give me a credit on the
That's the
bill.
trick.
How do they
That's
do
the
it?
trick, is how you measure that. Yep.
Anyway, enough said.
All right. Who else has their hand up that I can't see?
Think we've got nobody's, I don't see any hands raised, and we're after 8 o'clock. So does anybody have a kind of compelling question they want to ask before we adjourn? I don't see any hands going up. Thank you very much, John. This has been very educational, to say the least.
That was fun to do.
Well, I don't know if I would use the word fun, but it has been very helpful, I think, to all of us. So thanks for doing all the research and kind of pulling this together. And we'll have a copy up on our YouTube channel, and we'll be skipping the next three Thursday evenings. So the next session for the holidays, and the next session will be January 8th with what's planned is a Detroit solar story. So thanks everybody for coming, and enjoy the holidays. Have a good time. Take care.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you. Thanks a lot.